The DNA Diaries, a page 256 library publication, a book authored by Denny Roberts Ameke, and read to you by Charlotte Mugisha. Story1.
Cloning and the Future. Chapter 10. A Normal Life? Normal is just a word people use to cover the cracks in their reality. End quote. Daniel Mugume. They told her things would be easier now, that with James dead, the project dismantled, and Keon under international protection, life could return to something resembling normal. A second chance, a clean page, but normal, Helen quickly learned, was not a switch you flipped. It was something that shifted slowly at its own design, comforting at first, but always just a little too quiet and scary. After the Nairobi operation, the Americans moved her and Keon into a quiet residence in Muyenga on one of the slopes directly overlooking the city. The house was modest, cream walls, ceramic floors, and a garden where hibiscus flowers leaned lazily into the afternoon sun. No guards, and no US Special Forces personnel, just a black embassy vehicle with a Ugandan number plate for her to use in case of emergency. She was also given a new phone with 2 hotlines to the American embassy in case she needed anything or in case of an emergency. This was, in many ways, a home. There were no more test tubes or extraction tools, no invasive questions, no glass walls. Instead, Helen made breakfast again. She hung curtains. She folded Keon's clothes into drawers that weren't numbered or tagged. The boy had his own room with a real bed and a window he could open and close by himself. But even in that soft calm, there were reminders of what he was and what he had survived. Across the lake, Kalangala Island had become something else entirely. What was once a sealed research lab, designed to house genetic codes and laboratory equipment, had been quietly repurposed into a luxurious tourist eco-lodge, an exclusive destination for tourists and honeymooners. The transformation had happened over the weeks and months that followed the siege. The old surveillance station was now a honeymoon suite with panoramic views of the lake. Not a single line in the brochures mentioned its past. No one talked of the stolen children or the lives made and unmade in those underground rooms. The silence was simply strategic. Back in Muyenga, Helen followed the news reports when they surfaced. Short, edited press releases about Kalangala's relaunch, filled with photos of smiling tourists and Ugandan officials holding ribbon-cutting scissors. The world had moved on, but Helen hadn't, and neither had Keon. Keon, nearly 7 now, was unlike any boy she'd known, not because he was dramatic or loud, but because he wasn't. He moved with precision, spoke only when necessary, and seemed to absorb the world in silent calculations. He could sit in the garden for hours just watching a line of ants, then suddenly ask Helen if ants ever grieved the loss of their leaders. He rarely played, not in the usual way. Instead, he built long, deliberate towers of spoons, and once disassembled the television remote just to improve its button alignment. Doctors still came occasionally, always new ones, always smiling. Some brought puzzles, others books. One brought a guitar and tried to sing him lullabies. None of them stayed long. "It's like he sees through us," one said on her way out. For a while, Helen allowed herself to believe that they had turned a corner, that maybe Keon's memories had blurred enough for peace to be possible. She stopped checking the locks 3 times a night. She planted herbs in the backyard and started to dream again. But the truth, she realized, wasn't in the silence. It was in the moments when Keon stopped what he was doing, stared into nothing, and whispered under his breath, "This isn't over." The photo in the drawer. It was while folding laundry that Helen found it. A pile of folded paper placed at the bottom drawer of Keon's wardrobe, beneath his socks. Dozens of sketches, all drawn with the same black crayon, circles and triangles. And in the center of almost every page he drew a spiral. Some looked like eyes, others like maps, and a few like suns breaking through clouds. She stared at them, unsure whether to feel afraid or amazed. They weren't childish drawings. They were patterns, deliberate, layered, and calculated. She set them aside, planning to ask him later. But when she turned around, Keon was standing silently just behind her. "You weren't supposed to see those," he said. "Why?" she asked. "Because they're not all mine." Rebecca hadn't visited since she returned to Ginger from the Nairobi mission. The last time she saw them was for a short time when she landed in Entebbe from Moi Airport very early one Friday morning. After a few weeks of silence in her Ginger home, she received a call from Helen. "We've been moved," Helen said, her voice light for the first time in weeks. "To Muyenga, quiet place, Embassy House." Rebecca smiled faintly. "How is he?" she asked almost immediately. "Strangely okay," Helen replied. "Come this Saturday. I'll text you the directions. You'll like it here." When Rebecca arrived, the gate was slightly open, like it had been expecting her. The compound was calm, wrapped in the kind of peace that felt borrowed. Flowers danced effortlessly in the wind while the birds whistled from the mango tree above. She found Helen in the kitchen, barefoot, preparing millet porridge. Keon sat at the dining table, building a geometric structure from toothpicks and paper clips. He looked up as Rebecca entered, gave her a quiet salute, then returned to his play. "He doesn't forget," Rebecca said softly, pulling out a chair. "No," Helen replied. "He just chooses what to say." They spent the afternoon on the veranda under the mango tree. Two women who had seen too much, surviving on tea and short laughter, folding pain into memory and hoping the future could be shaped with small actions and prayer. The voices from Bulindo. The house was quiet that evening. Keon had dozed off on the living room carpet after rearranging all the books on the shelf by height and color. Outside, the sun had begun its slow dip behind the hills of Muyenga, painting the walls in soft gold. Helen stood by the kitchen window, phone in hand. She had stared at her mother's number for over 10 minutes, thumb hovering above the call button. What would she say? How would they react? Would they even want to hear from her after the silence, the fear, and the mysteries? She inhaled deeply, braced herself, and tapped call. The line rang once. Then a familiar voice came through, older, shakier than she remembered, but still hers. "Hello?" "Mama," Helen said, her voice catching. There was a pause on the other end, and then a soft gasp. "Omwana wange," her mother cried. Helen, is that you?" Tears welled up before Helen could stop them. "It's me, Mama. I'm here. I'm safe." A background noise followed on the line, the sound of footsteps, shifting chairs, and a plate falling. "Banange! Children, come! Your mother. It's your mother on the phone." She must have put the call on loudspeaker because suddenly there were voices, excited, uncertain, and rising in pitch like birds startled from trees. Mommy, is that you?" "Mama!" The youngest was crying already. Helen covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed. "I'm here," she managed to say through her tears. "I'm here, my loves. I missed you so much." The children talked in shifts. Bursts of laughter, sobs, and questions. "Where are you? Is Keon okay? Why didn't you call before?" "Mommy, the cat got lost but then came back just yesterday." Their grandmother interjected occasionally to make them speak in turns, but even herself was barely holding it together. "We thought we'd lost you," her son said softly, voice shaky. "I almost did," Helen admitted. "But I fought every day for all of you." They told her about school, that the second term had just closed, and that they were now on holiday. They talked about how Jaja had been growing tomatoes in old paint buckets, and how the neighbor's dog was found dead after terrorizing everyone for months. The oldest girl spoke about her school singing competition, and how she wished Helen had been there to watch it. It was 20 minutes of life, real life, flooding into a woman who hadn't felt alive in a long time. Even Keon woke and sat up quietly, listening from across the room. He didn't speak, but he watched Helen, eyes soft, head tilted like he was trying to understand the weight of love she felt. As the call ended, her mother said one last thing. "We never stopped praying and waiting for you to come back." When Helen hung up, she sat for long, phone pressed to her chest and eyes closed. Keon came and stood beside her, his small hand curling around hers. "They didn't forget," he said. "No," she whispered. "Neither did I." The call from Mackindia. That evening, around 9 p.m., another call came. This time from Mackindia. It was Lydia. They hadn't spoken in a while, not directly, but her voice was firm, not the panicked Lydia from weeks ago, but a woman who had learned to carry her scars in silence. "Helen," she began, "Naomi is not well." Her voice cracked just for a second. "She's been falling, fainting, and forgetting things. She still wakes up calling your names. But more scaring is that she drew something the other day and then fainted." Helen sat down. "What kind of something?" "I don't know. It looked like a spiral shape, or maybe a heartbeat. I can't tell." There was a pause. Then Lydia said quietly, "Please help me understand what's happening to my daughter." Lydia arrived with Naomi 2 days later, holding a plastic container with her food and a brown envelope full of drawings. Naomi looked shy, slightly pale, and unsure of where to sit. Keon didn't say anything. He simply motioned for her to come sit on the mat where he was seated and sketching shapes. They didn't talk much. They just sat and began drawing together on the same piece of paper, Naomi on the left side and Keon on the right. Their strokes were different, yet somehow aligned. After a while, Naomi said, "I don't remember why I remember you." Keon looked up. "That's okay. I remember for both of us." That night, Helen stood in the doorway of Keon's room. He hadn't slept. Instead, he sat at the window, staring at the full moon. "You should rest," she said softly. "I'm not tired," he replied. He turned and looked at her, eyes calm, voice steady. "She's waking up," he said. "The part of her they never finished." Helen knelt beside him. "Who is they?" Keon didn't answer. He only said, "They didn't stop at me."